emerges between the two halves of superficialis and continues distally to insert here on the base of the distal phalanx. The action of flexor digitorum superficialis is to flex the proximal IP joint and the MP joint. The action of flexor digitorum profundus is to flex both the IP joints and the MP joint. Now let's look at the muscles that extend the fingers. There are three: a large one that extends all four fingers and two small ones for the index and little fingers. The large one is extensor digitorum, sometimes called extensor digitorum communis. It arises from the common extensor tendon and thereby from the lateral epicondyle. As it passes distally, it divides into four slips, which pass together under the extensor retinaculum. We'll follow them beyond there in a minute. The extensor muscle to the little finger, extensor digiti minimi, arises from the ulnar side of extensor digitorum and passes under the retinaculum by itself. The extensor muscle to the index finger, extensor indicis, lies deep to extensor digitorum. It arises from the ulna and the interosseous membrane. Its tendon passes under the retinaculum along with extensor digitorum. Emerging from beneath the extensor retinaculum, the extensor tendons fan out. As they approach the MP joints, they branch and rejoin in an irregular fashion. Extensor indicis and extensor digiti minimi join the respective extensor digitorum tendons as they reach the MP joint. Here at the MP joint, each extensor tendon gives rise to the extensor hood, then divides into three parts, as we saw when we looked at the extensor mechanism a little while back. The extensor muscles produce extension at all three joints of the finger. Their main effect is at the MP joint. As we'll see later, the interosseous muscles and the lumbricals also have major roles in extending the interphalangeal joints. Now let's move on to look at the long muscles of the thumb. The thumb has a long flexor, a long abductor, and two extensors, a long one and a short one. The long flexor, flexor pollicis longus, lies deep in the forearm. We'll remove flexor digitorum superficialis to see it. Here's flexor pollicis longus, lying alongside flexor digitorum profundus. It arises from the anterior surface of the radius and from the interosseous membrane. Its tendon passes through the carpal tunnel with the finger flexors. Here's the tendon of flexor pollicis longus emerging. It enters the fibrous flexor sheath of the thumb and inserts on the base of the distal phalanx. Flexor pollicis longus flexes both the MP joint and the IP joint of the thumb. The other three long thumb muscles lie on the extensor aspect of the forearm. They lie deep to extensor digitorum, which we'll remove. This is the long abductor, abductor pollicis longus, and these are the extensors, extensor pollicis brevis and longus. The abductor arises from the radius here and also from the interosseous membrane. The two extensors arise a little more distally, the short one here, the long one here. Now we'll put extensor digitorum back in the picture. Here it is. The three thumb muscles emerge obliquely from the back of the thumb and part of the back of the index. The deep branch of the radial nerve, also known as the posterior interosseous nerve, is a motor nerve. It passes through the supinator and emerges here, deep to extensor digitorum. It breaks up into several branches. Between them, these supply extensor carpi ulnaris, extensor digitorum and the other two finger extensors, and these three long thumb muscles, abductor pollicis longus and extensor pollicis brevis and longus. Now let's look at the median nerve. Let's go back to the elbow where we saw it in the last section. Here's the median nerve. next to the brachial artery. To see where it's going, we'll retract flexor carpi radialis. The median nerve first dives between the two heads of pronator teres. It then immediately passes between the two heads of flexor digitorum superficialis. The median nerve, here it is, passes down the forearm between flexor digitorum superficialis and profundus. It emerges at the wrist to the radial side of the superficialis tendons. It's crossed by the tendons of palmaris longus and flexor carpi radialis. The median nerve passes through the carpal tunnel to reach the hand. It lies just beneath the palmar aponeurosis, which has been removed here. The median nerve gives off this small motor branch to the thenar muscles and then gives off these three common digital nerves. The common digital nerves break up into palmar digital nerves, two each for the thumb, index, and middle fingers, and usually one for the radial side of the ring finger. The medial nerve typically provides sensation to the medial half of the palm, the flexor aspect of the thumb, the index and middle fingers, and the radial side of the ring finger. Of the extrinsic hand muscles, the median nerve supplies flexor digitorum superficialis, flexor pollicis longus, and the radial half of flexor digitorum profundus. Of the intrinsic hand muscles, it supplies only the three thenar muscles and the radial two lumbricals. Lastly, let's look at the ulnar nerve. As you'll recall from the last section, the ulnar nerve enters the forearm by passing round the medial epicondyle and between the two heads of flexor carpi ulnaris. Here's the ulnar nerve. It runs down the forearm between flexor carpi ulnaris and flexor digitorum superficialis, with profundus deep to it. Here, it gives off a dorsal sensory branch, which goes to the back of the hand. At the wrist, it runs along the radial side of flexor carpi ulnaris. Along with the ulnar artery, it passes through the side tunnel in the edge of the flexor retinaculum. Here it is emerging from the tunnel. As before, the palmar aponeurosis has been removed.